Here we are again with MTA Queensland's weekly newsletter. Well, in case you've missed it, the first budget in 10 years of a Labor government has come and gone. Last night, the Albanese government and the Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers released their budget for the coming year. Not quite the coming year, because they're also saying there'll be another budget in May. Anyway, that's just government detail. For my sins, I actually went down to budget night together with my colleagues from the other industry associations around the country to try and get a grapple and meet with the range of ministers on what the future looks like. But back to the budget, what does it mean for you? To be frank, not that much. The budget was pretty conservative, certainly forecasting headwinds in the future around the economy, but far more expert economists will be debating that in the media, so I'm sure you'll see that debate. In terms of our industry, there's a couple of initiatives just worth keeping an eye on. There's a $345 million investment around electric vehicles. Now, what does that mean? The government's looking at a range of infrastructure, be that charging stations, as they slowly but surely build what they like to call a superhighway. Certainly from my engagement in Europe, our superhighway is not extensive enough to make a difference, but still, they're starting to lay down the framework. In terms of electric vehicles though, even in the small end of the market, electric vehicles tend to be at the moment, $25,000 to $30,000 more expensive than the equivalent car in a combustion engine. So the government started to make moves around trying to improve price parity. This stage, it's around tax relief. They're looking at taking off import duties. They're looking at exemptions from fringe benefit tax. That'll apply to any corporate or company that's buying a vehicle, but it also relates to anyone who's looking at salary sacrificing a vehicle. That's to the tune of, for a $50,000 car, around $9,000. Substantive, but still doesn't achieve price parity. For the rest of us that might be just out there buying cars, no real incentive yet available. That might come in future years. Certainly, again, the experience internationally is that the government's going to have to think about that. There's also a Driving the Nation Fund. Excuse the pun, but that's their language. And that's really about reducing carbon emissions or the carbon emission contribution from the transport industry. So remembering our industry contributes around 18-19% of the nation's carbon emissions. So we're pretty much the second worst offender, naturally, because we're out there delivering stuff, fixing stuff, driving. So there's a range of strategies to try and reduce carbon emissions across the entire fleet and across transport infrastructure. They're looking at creating, you guessed it, another superhighway. This time it's the hydrogen superhighway. So creating hydrogen refueling stations, getting ready for when hydrogen is a more prevalent power source, certainly in heavy vehicles and buses, but in time, certainly motor vehicles as well. Certainly that's what some of the car manufacturers tell us. But there's also a very interesting program where they're going to be funding over the next 3 years emissions testing for vehicles. It appears from what we've read so far, it'll be for newer vehicles, not for the ageing fleet, but certainly it's MTA Queensland's position that any shift on carbon emissions should mean that our members are funded to be able to do annual testing of vehicles, both in terms of safety, such as in New South Wales, but also in terms of their serviceability and emissions testing. So what all that means is the game is starting to shift, but not very fast yet. Keep an eye on it. Electrification still remains pretty at the forefront of government's minds. That's both federal and state. Last one around the skills agenda. 480,000 odd places have been funded over the next 3.5 to 4 years. Remembering about 4.3 million got trained in the vet sector last year, so it's not necessarily a massive increase. We don't know the detail yet as to whether that's places for apprenticeships, that's places for just TAFE or both independent providers, industry providers like ourselves, and the public provider. But very important to know, the boosting the apprenticeship wage incentive, so that's where many employers, many of you, were able to get subsidies up to 50% of the apprentice's wage. That's expired, has not been renewed. So that will not continue. Our government were very clear on that. I heard the Treasurer mention it a couple of times. They've invested enough in that. It's time now to look at other strategies and to try and incentivise those same apprentices to finish. That's the budget. That's certainly the big takeaways from our perspective. We'll have budget briefings on our website if you want to have a look. See you next week.